The Derelict appeared on the Calvin Reach's long-range array at 2:14 hours, and by 2:15, the ship's navigator had already flagged 2 reasons to leave it alone. The first was position. Whatever the vessel was, it sat 200 kilometers inside the boundary of Sector Vreth-Null, the specific region of deep space that the Cartographic Authority had marked with restriction code 0, the code that meant no survey, no salvage, no approach for reasons the authority's public files declined to specify. The Calvin Reach was a licensed deep survey vessel with authority clearance to operate along the Vreth boundary. They were not licensed to cross it. They were not licensed to look at anything inside it. The fact that the long-range array had captured the Derelict's profile at this range meant their instruments had been running a passive sweep that technically extended into restricted space, which was itself a violation the mission's lead surveyor had quietly chosen not to log. The second reason was the profile. The Derelict was large, perhaps 3 times the displacement of the Calvin Reach, and it did not match any vessel class in the authority's public registry. The hull geometry was wrong in specific ways: too angular, sections too modular, the drive configuration reading as something that predated the current transit architecture by several generations. The array gave a mass estimate, and then flagged its own calculation as unreliable, because the interior density readings were inconsistent with a vessel of that size running empty. The interior readings were inconsistent with a vessel running empty at all. Lead surveyor Den Vareth looked at the readings for 4 minutes and then asked for a volunteer crew to take the launch across. He had 3 takers before he finished the sentence. He chose 2 of them. Raya Sarin, 26, systems specialist, who had asked questions about the density readings instead of the hull geometry, and therefore understood what she was volunteering for, and Asel Mar, who was the launch pilot and did not have the option of not going. Raya did not tell anyone she was afraid. Fear was not productive, and this crew did not need to know her internal register. She checked her kit, sealed her suit's environment layer, and ran the launch's pre-check while Den gave them his last instruction. Passive scans only, no contact, no boarding, observe from a safe distance and return with sensor data. He said it without quite meeting her eyes, which told her he already knew the instruction was unlikely to survive contact with whatever they found over there. The launch crossed the 200 kilometers in 40 minutes. At 50 kilometers out, Raya's sensors confirmed what the Calvin Reach's array had suggested. The Derelict was not broadcasting any distress signal, not running any navigation lights, not responding to the standard hail oscil sent on the authority's emergency frequency. The hull appeared intact. The interior density readings, however, were remarkable. Distributed mass, roughly even throughout the vessel's compartments, warm enough relative to the hull temperature to register as distinct from the dead cold of the surrounding metal. "Those are life sign readings," Asel said. "Those are heat signatures," Raya said, "not the same thing." He accepted this distinction without arguing it. At 20 kilometers, she got a better resolution on the Derelict's registry markings: partial, weathered, the paint degraded by radiation exposure to near illegibility, but enough of the character string remained to attempt a match. No match in the authority's registry. No match in the supplemental records she carried. She ran the character encoding protocol anyway, because the encoding system itself was something, and the system told her the format was consistent with a species designation she had seen once in a restricted archive footnote. The Vreth-Null Collective, a civilization the authorities' historians cataloged as having occupied the sector prior to the current stellar epoch. Prior to the current stellar epoch meant, in practical terms, that whatever this vessel had been, it was old in a way that made the word old feel insufficient. "Den is going to tell us not to board," Asel said. Raya was already composing the request. Den is going to tell us not to board, and then he's going to think about the density readings and tell us to use our judgment. She was right. The reply came back in 3 minutes. Use your judgment, stay in contact, get out the moment anything reads wrong. The boarding hatch was on the derelict's port dorsal quarter. It was not locked. The mechanism was unpowered, which meant the manual release was the only option, which meant someone had designed it to be operated by hands or appendages in a specific size range. And in this case it worked. Raya cycled it in 90 seconds and the hatch opened into a corridor that smelled, through her suit's external sensors, of old metal and something organic she could not identify. The corridor was dark. Her suit's lights showed clean geometry, no debris, no structural damage, no evidence that the vessel had ever been through anything violent. The floors were clean. The walls were clean. The vessel looked maintained. She noted this and kept moving. The first compartment was empty. The second was a storage space, sealed containers of a material her scanner identified as an organic polymer, stacked to the ceiling and undisturbed. The third compartment had a hatch that was sealed from the inside. She stood in front of that hatch for a moment and listened to the silence. The derelict was not silent. She heard it now, or more precisely, her suit's audio sensors captured it. A low vibration distributed through the vessel's hull, not mechanical, not any system she recognized. It had a cadence. Not regular in the mechanical sense, but patterned in the way that living things are patterned, the way a respiratory cycle has a rhythm without being a clock. She had been a systems specialist for 6 years, and she had never heard a ship's hull make that sound. She called Asil on the short-range channel. "Are you still on the hull?" "Affirmative, getting a strange reading on my external sensors, like the hull temperature just shifted." "Stay on the hull, do not come inside." She stood at the hatch for another 10 seconds, running her scanner over the surface. The scan returned no information she could use, no biological signature that matched anything in her reference library, no environmental hazard her suit's sensors were calibrated to flag, no electromagnetic field from powered systems she could locate. The hatch was simply a sealed door on a vessel that had been drifting inside a restricted zone for longer than any of them could account for, and whatever was generating that cadence was on the other side of it, and the choice to open the hatch or not was hers. Den had said, "Use your judgment." She had been sent across because she understood what she was volunteering for. She opened it. The hatch yielded the same way the outer one had, slowly, with a hydraulic hiss that told her some internal pressure system was still active. Beyond it was a large compartment, a cargo hold, or something repurposed as one. The lights in this compartment were on, low and amber, running from a source she could not immediately trace. She stepped inside. The containers here were not stacked. They were arranged in a pattern she recognized only after a moment, radiating outward from a central point, with channels between them, and at the center of the arrangement, a single large unit that her scanner told her was warm, warmer than the ambient, warmer than any passive heat retention could account for, warm in the specific range the Kelvin Reach's long-range array had flagged and then declined to classify. She took 3 steps toward the central unit and stopped. The cadence changed. She did not see anything move. The compartment was lit, and she could see every container and every channel between them, and nothing had moved. But the rhythm in the hull shifted, faster now, shorter intervals, the way a pulse quickens. And she understood with the precision of someone trained for accurate threat assessment that the ship was not empty in the way she had initially assumed. The ship was occupied. It had always been occupied. The heat signatures were not residual readings from decaying systems or insulated cargo. They were organisms. The containers were not containers. She was already moving for the hatch when the first one opened. She did not look back. This was discipline, not panic. She understood that looking back would cost her a step, and a step was the margin she could not spend. She reached the hatch at the same moment she heard Asil's voice on the channel saying something fast and alarmed, and she did not stop to parse it. The hatch was still open. She went through it. The corridor was no longer dark. The amber light from the hold had followed her, or rather the source of it had, which told her that the light was not a fixture. She cleared the second compartment at a run, cleared the first compartment, and reached the boarding corridor with 40 meters to the outer hatch. Behind her, she heard something that was not a mechanical sound. It was the sound of a vessel whose distributed occupants had decided to move at the same moment, and the hull's cadence had abandoned its rhythm entirely. She hit the outer hatch at speed. It opened, still unpowered, still manual, but she had the release sequence in her hands from the entry, and they found it correctly the first time. The hatch swung out onto the hull, and she was through it before she registered that she had made the step across the threshold. The exterior of the hull was not what it had been 40 minutes earlier. She registered this in the fraction of a second she allowed herself to look. The surface plating along the corridor section was warmer to her suit's infrared, not critically, not enough to be a hazard, but measurably warmer than cold metal had any reason to be. The amber glow she had seen from the launch on approach had been a faint trace at the edges of the boarding hatch when she had entered. It was no longer faint. It was visible through the hull seams in a widening arc from the cargo hold outward, as if whatever was inside had moved toward the exterior, or as if the interior had grown. She filed this under things she would report in precise technical language, and kept moving. Ossel had the launch positioned at 3 meters off the hull. He had moved it without instruction, which she noted and appreciated. She crossed the gap in a controlled push and sealed the launch hatch behind her. "Go," she said. He went. She did not watch the derelict through the viewport. She kept her eyes on the launch's systems panel and watched the distance counter increment, and she gave herself 90 seconds of shaking before she stopped and made herself think precisely about what she was going to report and how. Ossel did not ask her to explain anything. He flew the return heading without speaking, which was the correct response. At 80 kilometers out, he said, "The array is still reading distributed heat from the vessel," she said. "Log it and say nothing to Den until I've briefed him." He nodded and kept flying. By the time the Calvin reach grew in the forward display, she had the incident account drafted in her head in the flat technical register her training required, with every specific detail included, and one detail withheld, the detail she had seen in the fraction of a second before the hatch had swung fully open. She was not ready to put that in a report. She was not sure she would ever be ready to put it in a report. Den Vareth received the report in the survey room with the 2 remaining crew members present. She gave it clean and precise, and when she finished, he asked 3 questions about the sensor readings and 1 question about the cadence change, and then he sat looking at nothing. "Are there others?" he said. "Other vessels, other sites?" She understood the question. The Vreth-Null collective had been catalogued as having occupied the sector. Occupied implied not one vessel. Occupied implied infrastructure. The authorities' records for Vreth-Null were thin in the specific way records went thin when someone had sealed the entries that once existed there, and Restriction Code 0 had been in place longer than any of them had been alive. "I don't know," she said. Den filed the report that day, filed it properly, with the full sensor archive attached and her incident account embedded, and he routed it to the authorities' restricted archive division rather than the general survey log. The restricted division confirmed receipt 3 hours later and assigned the filing to a sealed case number she was never given. 3 weeks after that, she received a standard notification. Case 0 Vreth-Null 7 had been reviewed and assessed. No further survey activity was authorized in the relevant sector, and her mission crew's Class II clearance had been noted and would be applied to all future deployment assignments. Applied to all future deployment assignments meant she would not be sent to the Vreth boundary again. No crew was sent to the Vreth boundary again. The boundary stayed closed. The restricted archive stayed sealed. The derelict remained inside the zone, if it remained at all, 200 kilometers past the line the authority had drawn and declined to explain, carrying its distributed warmth and its amber light, and its cadence that did not match any mechanical system she had ever logged, patient and persistent in the old dark that had been there long before any of them learned to draw lines in space. She never crossed it again. She never elaborated to anyone outside the sealed case on what she had seen when the first container opened. The case record noted her hesitation on that point and logged it as witness elected not to describe. The case closed. The zone stayed forbidden. And the boundary that the galaxy had learned, slowly and without any formal instruction, to leave alone held.